Mara Collins did not cry when the train pulled away and left her standing alone on that platform. She had learned a long time ago that tears were a luxury she could not afford. She counted what she had: one worn suitcase, $4.60, and the name of a man who had promised her a life, a man who was nowhere to be found. The platform was empty. The summer heat pressed down on her like a hand trying to push her into the dirt. And for one long, terrible moment, she almost let it. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Mara's journey all the way to the end. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The letter had promised her everything. Mara had read it so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds, the ink slightly smeared where her fingers always stopped at the part where Garrett Prescott wrote, "I am a man of means and of my word, Miss Collins. You will want for nothing here." She had believed that. God help her, she had believed every single word of it. She believed it through the 3-day train ride from St. Louis. She believed it when the landscape changed from city smoke to open golden plains. She believed it as the conductor called out, "Elk Crossing, Wyoming," and she gathered her suitcase and smoothed the front of her traveling dress with both hands, telling herself she looked fine, telling herself she looked like a woman worth meeting at a station. She stopped believing it the moment she stepped onto that platform and found nothing waiting for her but heat and silence. "End of the line, ma'am," the conductor said behind her, already moving to help another passenger. "Yes," Mara said. "I can see that." The train groaned and hissed and pulled away. She stood still while it went. She didn't turn around to watch it go, because she already knew what she would feel if she did the specific hollow pull of something leaving that was not coming back. She had felt it before. The first time was when she was 9 years old, and her father walked out the front door of their house in Ohio and never returned. She had stood at the window, then the same way she stood on the platform now, completely upright, jaw set, refusing to fold. Mara Collins had learned early that the world would try to fold her. It had been trying her entire life. She looked down the main road that stretched out from the station into the small sun-baked town of Elk Crossing. A handful of storefronts, a church with a crooked steeple, a water trough with a horse standing at it, flicking flies off its flank. A few townspeople moving in and out of doorways, pausing to look at her, the way people in small towns always pause to look at strangers with a particular mixture of curiosity and judgment that felt like being measured for something you hadn't agreed to. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the nearest building that looked like it might have people inside. It was a general store. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Beckett's Dry Goods and Supplies." The bell above the door rang when she pushed it open, and a woman behind the counter looked up. She was somewhere in her 60s, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, with the kind of face that had once been pretty and had traded pretty for something more useful: authority. "Help you," the woman said. "I hope so," Mara said. "I'm looking for Garrett Prescott. I was told he lives near this town." The woman's expression shifted. It was subtle, just a slight tightening around the eyes, a stillness that moved through her like a cold current, but Mara caught it. She had spent her whole life reading faces, because faces told the truth, even when mouths didn't. "You the mail order?" the woman asked. Mara felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm the woman he sent for, if that's what you mean." "Name's Alma Beckett." The woman came around the counter, slowly studying Mara the way you'd study something you recognized but couldn't quite place. "And you are?" "Mara Collins." Alma Beckett was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully and without malice, "How long you been on that train, Miss Collins?" 3 days. "And no one met you at the station?" "No." Another pause. Alma reached under the counter and produced a tin cup and poured water from a pitcher without being asked. She set it on the counter in front of Mara. "Drink that," she said. "You look like you're about to either faint or fight somebody, and the water'll help with both." Mara drank. The water was warm, but she didn't care. "Where is he?" Mara asked. Alma folded her hands on the counter. "Miss Collins, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it plainly, because you deserve plain. Garrett Prescott rode out of Elk Crossing 4 days ago. left his ranch hand in charge of the property, and didn't say where he was going or when he'd be back. The cup was still in Mara's hand. She set it down carefully on the counter. 4 days ago, she repeated. Yes, ma'am. Before I arrived. Yes, ma'am. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. Mara looked at the counter. She looked at the cup. She looked at her own hands, which were steady, and she was grateful for that. At least that her hands were steady, even when nothing else was. Has he done this before? Mara asked. Alma opened her mouth, closed it, then said quietly, You're not the first woman to come off that train looking for Garrett Prescott, Miss Collins. Something cold moved through Mara's chest. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition, the particular sting of a truth you already suspected landing with confirmation. How many, she asked. 2 that I know of, Alma said, though I expect there may have been others before my time. And where are those women now? Gone, Alma said. Both of them left town inside of a week. One went back east, the other... She stopped. I don't know where the other one went. Mara stood very still for a long moment. Outside, through the store's front window, she could see the street baking in the afternoon heat. A group of men sat on the porch of what looked like a saloon across the road, and at least 2 of them were watching the store's front door with the kind of idle interest that told her they'd already heard she arrived, that they were already talking. She knew what they were saying. She had heard variations of it her whole life. Too big, too plain, too desperate. What did she expect? She straightened her spine. Is there work available in this town? She asked. Any kind. I'm not particular. Alma blinked as if she had expected something other than that tears maybe, or collapse, or the immediate request to buy a train ticket back east. You're not leaving, she asked. I have $4.60, Mara said. A ticket back to St. Louis costs more than that, so no, Mrs. Beckett, I am not leaving. Not today. Alma studied her for a long moment with those sharp, measuring eyes. Then slowly something in her expression changed, not quite a smile, but the beginning of one. I might know of something, Alma said carefully, though I'd want to make sure you understand the situation before I send you into it. Tell me, Mara said. There's a rancher north of town, Ethan Hawkins. Lost his wife last winter to fever. He's got a 7-year-old boy and a ranch to run, and he's been doing both alone since January. Alma paused. He came in last week asking if I knew of any woman willing to cook and keep house in exchange for room and board. Said he'd pay a small wage on top of it once the harvest came in. That sounds reasonable, Mara said. It is reasonable, Alma said. Ethan Hawkins is a reasonable man. A good one, far as I can tell. She hesitated again. He's also private, quiet. He don't say much and he don't ask for much, but he's carrying a heavy thing and it shows on him. I just want you to know what you'd be walking into. I've walked into harder things, Mara said. Alma looked at her for one more beat. Then she nodded once the way people nod when they've made a decision they feel right about. I'll write you a note, Alma said. You take it out to the Hawkins Ranch. It's about 2 miles north, follow the main road, until you see the split-rail fence with the broken top post. That's his property line. Thank you, Mara said. Don't thank me yet, Alma said, already moving toward the back of the store for paper and ink. Thank me if it works out. Mara waited. Through the window, she could see the men on the saloon porch losing interest and turning back to their own conversation. The horse at the water trough had wandered off. The street was just a street again, ordinary and indifferent the way streets were. She thought about Garrett Prescott. She thought about his letter and his promises, and the careful, deliberate script he had used to write words he apparently never meant. She thought about the 2 women who had come before her, and how they had arrived on the same platform with the same hope and left with none of it. She thought, I am not going to be one of those women. Not because she was stronger than them. She didn't know anything about them. Maybe they were stronger than her. Maybe they had simply made the sensible choice, and she was the foolish one for staying. But she had $4.60 and a worn suitcase, and the particular stubbornness of a woman who had been left behind too many times to believe that leaving was the answer. So she would stay. She would work. And she would figure out the rest from there. Alma returned with a folded note and pressed it into Mara's hand. "One more thing," Alma said. "The boy Noah, he's had a hard go of it, losing his mother at that age." She shook her head. "He's a sweet child, a little lost right now. Just be patient with him." "I will," Mara said. She stepped back out into the heat. The walk north was long and the suitcase was heavy, and the sun did not care about either of those things. Mara switched the case from hand to hand as the road stretched out flat and dry through scrub grass and scattered cottonwoods that offered no real shade, just the idea of it. She had almost reached what she thought might be the broken fence post when she heard it. Running footsteps, small and fast, coming hard across the ground from somewhere to her right. She turned. A boy came tearing across the field toward her, small, dark-haired, wearing a shirt that was half untucked and boots that were a size too big. Stumbling a little on the uneven ground, but not slowing down, not even slightly running, like he had been waiting all day for exactly this moment. Running like he had been waiting longer than that. "Mama!" The word hit Mara somewhere below the ribs. Before she could move or speak or even fully process what was happening, the boy crashed into her arms around her waist, face pressed hard into her midsection, holding on with the desperate whole-bodied grip of a child who had been let go of one too many times. "Mama," he said again, muffled and certain. "You came back." Mara stood very still. The suitcase was still in her hand. The sun was still hot on her back. The world was still the same world it had been 30 seconds ago. And yet, she set the suitcase down slowly. She put one hand on the boy's back, light, careful, the way you'd touch something you were afraid might shatter, and she felt him shudder under her palm, a full-body exhale, like the release of something that had been held too tight for too long. "Noah." The voice came from behind the boy. She looked up. A man was walking toward them from the direction of the ranch house. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a hat pulled low against the sun, moving with the deliberate economy of someone who had learned to conserve energy because there was always more work waiting. He stopped a few feet away, and when he pushed back the brim of his hat and looked at her, she saw a face that was weathered and tired, and somewhere underneath all of that painfully young for what it had been asked to carry. "Noah," he said again, quieter. "Son, come here." "She came back, Pa," the boy said, not moving. "She came back." The man's jaw tightened. His eyes met Mara's, and she saw it there, the apology, the exhaustion, the flicker of something raw that he pulled back before it could become visible. He took the few remaining steps and crouched down beside the boy, hands on the narrow shoulders. "Noah, this isn't Mama." His voice was low and even, the voice of a man who had said some version of this many times. "Mama's not coming back. You know that." The boy didn't let go of Mara immediately. He pulled back just enough to look up at her face, and she looked down at him, and what she saw made something in her chest clench tight. He was checking. Not confused exactly, but hoping. Looking at her face the way you look at something when you already know the answer, but can't stop asking the question. "I know," Noah said finally, very small. "I know she ain't." He stepped back. Ethan Hawkins stood up. "I'm sorry about that," he said to Mara. "He does this sometimes. When he misses her..." He stopped, cleared his throat. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," Mara said. "Please." He looked at her. "You're not from around here." "No, I came on the train today. I'm Mara Collins." She held out Alma's note. "Mrs. Beckett said you might have work. I need a place to stay, and I'm willing to earn it." He took the note. Read it. Looked back up at her, and she saw the same measuring she'd seen in Alma Beckett's eyes, only different, more guarded, more careful, the caution of a man who had learned that things could be taken from him without warning. "The work is real," he said. "It's not easy. House needs keeping, meals need cooking, and the boy needs..." He paused. "He needs consistency. Can you provide that?" Yes, Mara said. I can pay a small wage when harvest comes. Until then, it's room and board. That's fine. He studied her for another moment. Then he looked down at Noah, who was watching both of them with those careful, too old eyes. What do you think, son? Ethan said quietly. Noah looked at Mara. Then he reached out and took the handle of her suitcase. I'll carry it, he said. It's heavy. Ethan Hawkins watched his son pick up a stranger's suitcase and start walking toward the house, and something moved across his face that was too complicated to name grief and relief. And something else she couldn't identify. Something that looked almost like the first tentative reach toward hope. All right, Miss Collins, he said. He picked his hat back up and resettled it. Welcome to the Hawkins Ranch. She followed the boy up the dusty path toward the house, the suitcase bumping against his small legs with every step, and he didn't put it down once. And for the first time since she had stepped off that train and found nobody waiting, Mara Collins felt the ground beneath her feet settle into something that didn't feel quite so much like falling. The first night at the Hawkins Ranch, Mara didn't sleep. She lay on the narrow cot in the small room off the kitchen, a room that still smelled faintly of lavender, which told her more about the woman who used to live here than any words could have. And she stared at the ceiling and listened to the house breathe around her. The creak of old wood settling, the distant sound of cattle, a dog somewhere outside shifting in its sleep, and then very quietly the sound of a child crying. She was up before she made the decision to move. Her feet found the floor, and she was through the door and down the short hall before she'd even fully registered what she was doing. The boy's room was easy to find, the only door with a sliver of moonlight under it. She pushed it open. Noah was sitting up in bed, both fists pressed against his eyes, crying the way children cry when they've been trying not to and finally can't hold it anymore, silent and heaving the worst kind. Mara sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't say anything right away. She didn't reach for him. She just sat there close enough that he could feel she was present, and she waited. After a moment, Noah dropped his fists and looked at her. His face was wet, and his eyes were swollen, and he looked so young it made her chest hurt. I had a dream, he whispered. I know, she said. She was in it. I know. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, Do you think she can see me from wherever she is? Mara thought about the right answer and the honest answer and whether they were the same thing. Yes, she said. I think she can see you. And I think she's proud of what she sees. Noah was quiet. Then he lay back down, and Mara sat there until his breathing evened out and his fists uncurled, and he was somewhere past the dream and into something quieter. She was almost back to her own room when she heard the floorboard creak behind her. She turned. Ethan was standing in the hallway fully dressed, which told her he hadn't been sleeping either. He had the look of a man who had heard every word of that conversation through a thin wall and was working very hard to keep his face neutral about it. Thank you, he said. His voice was rough with something she recognized as the particular hoarseness that comes from swallowing too much. He needed someone to sit with him, she said simply. Ethan nodded, looked at the floor, then back up at her. I'm not always... He stopped, started again. The nights are hard for him. I don't always know what to say. You don't have to know what to say, Mara said. You just have to stay. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, something between recognition and resistance, like a man hearing a truth he wasn't ready to accept yet. Then he nodded once and went back to his room and closed the door quietly, and Mara went back to hers. She didn't sleep for a long time after that, but somehow the ceiling didn't feel quite so foreign. By the second morning, Mara had found the rhythm of the house. It wasn't complicated, it was just neglected, the way things get neglected when the person holding them together is gone, and everyone left behind is simply surviving. The kitchen needed organizing. The garden had gone mostly to weeds, except for the section that Noah had apparently been trying to tend on his own, which broke her heart a little. There was mending piled in a basket by the window that looked like it had been accumulating since January. She started with breakfast because breakfast was concrete and solvable. When Ethan came in from the early chores and found eggs and biscuits and coffee on the table, He stopped in the doorway and looked at it the way a man looks at something he had almost forgotten was possible. "You didn't have to do all that," he said. "I know," Mara said. "Sit down." He sat. Noah came thundering in from outside, a moment later screen door banging behind him, and stopped when he saw the table. "You made biscuits," he announced. "I did. Mama used to make biscuits on Sundays." The air in the kitchen got very still. Ethan's hand stopped moving over his coffee cup. Mara looked at the boy steadily. "Well," she said, "I make them on Tuesdays too. Sit down, Noah." He sat. And that was that. They ate breakfast, and it was ordinary and quiet and real, and nobody said another word about it, but something had shifted. Some small important thing had settled into place in the architecture of those three people sitting around that table, and all of them felt it, even if none of them said so. On the third day, trouble arrived in the form of two men from town. Mara was in the garden pulling weeds with her bare hands, because she hadn't found the gardening gloves yet when she heard hoofbeats and looked up to see a pair of riders coming up the path toward the house. She didn't recognize either of them, but she recognized the way they moved, the particular ease of men who expected to be accommodated. Ethan came out from the barn before they reached the house. "Coulson, Briggs." His voice was flat, not unfriendly, but not warm either. The voice of a man who knew exactly what kind of visit this was before a single word had been spoken. "Something I can do for you." The first rider, heavy-set with a sun-reddened face, looked past Ethan to Mara in the garden with open curiosity. "Heard you took in a woman," he said. "The mail order from the station." "I hired a housekeeper," Ethan said. "Is that a concern of yours, Coulson?" "Just wondering if you know what you're dealing with," Coulson said. "Woman comes here for Prescott. Prescott ain't there to claim her. That's a situation with complications." "She's employed," Ethan said. "That's simple enough." "Prescott might not see it that way when he gets back." "Then Prescott can come talk to me himself," Ethan said. "You boys need anything else?" The second rider, younger, quieter. The kind of quiet that made Mara's neck prickle, glanced at her again, then back at Ethan. "Just being neighborly," he said, and the word sat wrong in his mouth, too casual for what it was covering. "Appreciate it," Ethan said with a finality that was not appreciation at all. They left. Ethan watched them go until they'd cleared the property line. Then he walked back to where Mara was standing in the garden. "How much of that did you hear?" he asked. "Enough," she said. "Prescott has friends in town," Ethan said. He looked at her directly. "I need you to understand what that means. I'm not trying to frighten you. I just want you to know what you're in the middle of." "I was already in the middle of it when I stepped off that train," Mara said. "That didn't start with you." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "I suppose it didn't." "Is he dangerous?" she asked. "Prescott." Ethan was quiet for a beat too long. "He's the kind of man who doesn't need to be physically dangerous," he said finally. "He's got lawyers. He's got money. He owns property all over this county, and he's got half the town council eating out of his hand." He paused. "That kind of dangerous is harder to fight than the other kind." Mara pulled a weed out of the ground with more force than necessary. "Then we'll have to be smarter than the other kind," she said. Ethan almost smiled. It didn't quite make it, but it tried. By the end of the first week, Noah had decided that Mara was his. Not in the way he'd called her mama on the road that had been something else, something dreamlike and desperate, but in a quieter, more deliberate way. He started following her. Not constantly, not underfoot, but nearby, always in the same room, always positioned where he could see her. When she went to the garden, he sat on the porch steps. When she was in the kitchen, he appeared at the table with a book he wasn't really reading. She let him. She didn't make a production of it. She just let him orbit, and she talked to him the way she'd always wanted someone to talk to her, like what he said mattered, like his questions deserved real answers, like he was a full person and not an inconvenient small one. "Why did Mr. Prescott leave?" Noah asked one afternoon. He was at the kitchen table ostensibly doing the reading Ethan had assigned him. He was not doing the reading. Mara kept her hands moving, rolling out the dough she'd been working on. "I don't know," she said. "Did you do something wrong?" "No," she said. "I don't believe I did." "Then why?" She thought about it. "Some people make promises they never intend to keep," she said. "Not because of anything the other person did, just because they're the kind of person who does that." Noah chewed on this. "That ain't right," he said. "No," she agreed. "It ain't. Pa says a man's word is everything he's got." "Your pa is right." Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you going to leave? When Mr. Prescott comes back?" The rolling pin stopped. Mara looked at the boy. He was looking back at her with those eyes that were too steady for 7 years old. The eyes of a child who had already learned that asking the question directly was the only way to get an honest answer. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Not because of him." Noah held her gaze for another second. Then he went back to his book. But his shoulders, which had been tight around his ears since he asked the question, came down about an inch. She noticed. She didn't say anything. She just noticed. It was Alma Beckett who brought the news 9 days after Mara arrived. The older woman drove out to the ranch in her wagon on a Thursday morning, which told Mara it wasn't a casual visit before Alma had even set foot on the ground. Alma Beckett ran a store 6 days a week. She didn't drive 2 miles out of town on a workday for no reason. Ethan was out on the range. Noah was with him. Mara met Alma at the door. "He's back," Alma said without preamble. Mara felt the words land in her stomach like something cold and heavy. "When?" "Last night, rode in after dark." Alma came inside without being invited, which told Mara something else, that this was urgent enough to skip pleasantries. "I heard about it this morning from Bill Marsh, who was at the saloon when Prescott came in." "Did he ask about me?" "Not yet," Alma said. "But he will. You can count on it. The man doesn't leave loose ends." She sat down at the kitchen table and looked at Mara steadily. "I want to know what you're planning to do." "Nothing," Mara said. "I'm not going to him. I'm not leaving. I'm going to stay exactly where I am and do exactly what I've been doing." "He may not allow that." "He doesn't get to allow or not allow anything," Mara said. "There was no marriage. He left before I arrived. Whatever he thinks that contract entitles him to, it doesn't entitle him to me." Alma looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to need someone in your corner who knows the law," she said. "Prescott's got Judge Harlan in his pocket near as I can tell, but there's a circuit judge comes through every month, Judge Ellery. Man's got a reputation for being harder to buy." "When does he come through?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Mara turned the number over in her mind. 3 weeks of holding her ground against a man with money and lawyers, and the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no by anyone who mattered. "All right," she said. 3 weeks. "There's something else," Alma said, and the way she said it, slower, more careful, made Mara's chest tighten. "Tell me." "Tell." "You're not the first woman Prescott sent for," Alma said. "I told you that. But what I didn't tell you, what I didn't know for certain until this week, is that he does it deliberately." She paused. "He sends for women from out of state, signs the contract, waits until they arrive, then leaves. The property contract he draws up, the one that looks like a marriage agreement. It actually includes a clause that signs over any personal property the woman brings with her if the union is not fulfilled on her end." Mara stared at her. "He steals from them." "Legally," Alma said. "Or close enough to legal that it's hard to fight. He finds women with nothing much to steal, which means even when someone objects, it's not worth the legal fight." She looked at Mara steadily. "Except you came here with nothing, Miss Collins, which means he gets nothing from you. And that might make him angry enough to get mean about it." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, somewhere distant, she could hear the low call of cattle. "Let him get mean," Mara said. "I've been dealing with mean my whole life." Alma nodded slowly. Then she reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper and set it on the table between them. I wrote down the names of the other women, she said. The ones I know of. If you can get word to them before the circuit judge arrives, if they're willing to speak. It becomes a pattern, Mara said. Not just my word against his. Yes, Alma said. Mara picked up the paper and held it. The names on it were just names women she didn't know. Women who had stood on the same platform she'd stood on, and felt the same particular devastation of being left. She folded it carefully and put it in her apron pocket. I'll write to them today, she said. Alma stood up to leave. At the door she paused and turned back. Miss Collins, she said. I've watched a lot of people come through this town. Most of them are trying to get somewhere else. She looked at her steadily. You're the first one in a long time who seems like you're actually trying to stay. After Alma left, Mara stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Then she sat down at the table and pulled out paper and a pen and began to write. She was still writing when she heard hoofbeats outside. Not Alma leaving, but something else. Something approaching. She looked up through the window. A man she had never seen before in person, but somehow already recognized too well dressed for a ranch road, sitting his horse with the particular ease of a man who expected the world to arrange itself around him, stopped at the edge of the yard and looked directly at the house. Directly, it seemed, at her. Garrett Prescott touched the brim of his hat and smiled. Mara did not move from the table. She sat with the pen still in her hand and the unfinished letters in front of her, and she watched Garrett Prescott dismount in the yard of a man whose property he had no invitation to enter, and she made a decision. In the space of about 3 seconds, she was not going to go to the door. She was not going to make this easy for him. If he wanted to speak to her, he was going to have to come to her, and he was going to have to do it knowing she was not afraid. She put the pen down. She folded her hands on the table. She waited. He knocked. She didn't answer. He knocked again, harder. Miss Collins, I know you're in there. I saw you through the window. She stood up, crossed to the door, and opened it. Not wide, just enough. She looked at him through the gap and said nothing. Up close, Garrett Prescott was exactly what she'd expected, and somehow worse for it. He was handsome in a way that had clearly worked for him his whole life. Square jaw, easy smile. The kind of face that invited trust before it had done anything to earn it. He was wearing a jacket that cost more than her train ticket. His hat was clean. His boots were clean. Everything about him was clean in the way that said other people did the dirty work. Miss Collins, he said, and his voice was warm, patient. The voice of a man who believed he could afford to be patient. I owe you an apology. You owe me a great deal more than that, Mara said. Something moved behind his eyes. Quick, controlled, gone before she could name it. His smile didn't waver. You're right. Absolutely right. I had business that took me away unexpectedly, a matter I couldn't delay, and I failed to send word in time. That was wrong of me, and I am genuinely sorry for the distress it caused. It caused more than distress, she said. It left me stranded in a town I'd never been to with no money and no arrangements made. Which is why I'm here, he said smoothly. To make it right. I've spoken to the Reverend about moving up the ceremony. We could be married by the end of the week if you're agreeable, and I'll have your things moved to my property today. You don't have to stay in this. He glanced past her into the kitchen, and his eyes did a fast calculation she recognized even through the charm. This arrangement any longer. I'm not in an arrangement, Mara said. I'm employed by Mr. Hawkins, and I'm staying. The warmth in Prescott's voice didn't disappear. It just got thinner. Miss Collins, we have a contract. We have a piece of paper that you abandoned the terms of before I even arrived, she said. You left before I got here. Whatever that document says, you didn't hold up your end of it. A minor delay. 4 days is not a delay, she said. 4 days is a choice. His jaw tightened just slightly, just enough for her to see it. He recovered fast. I understand you're upset. You have every right to be, but the legal reality of that contract is something you can discuss with me in front of a judge, Mara said. I'll be happy to do that. Now I'd ask you to leave this property." The smile finally dropped. Not all the way he kept enough of it to maintain the veneer, but the warmth was gone, and what was underneath it was cooler and considerably more calculating. He looked at her for a long moment, and she held his gaze without flinching, and she could feel him recalibrating, reassessing, filing her away in a different category than the one he'd arrived with. "I see you've found yourself some courage here," he said quietly. "I hope it serves you well when things get complicated." "Is that a threat, Mr. Prescott?" "It's an observation," he said. He touched the brim of his hat. "Good afternoon, Miss Collins. I'll be in touch." He turned and walked back to his horse, and Mara stood in the doorway and watched him go, and she did not let herself breathe fully until he'd cleared the gate and the hoofbeats had faded down the road. Then she went back inside and picked up her pen and wrote faster. Ethan came back with Noah an hour later. She told him before he'd even gotten his boots off. She told him plainly the way she'd learned he received things best, no softening, no circling, just the facts in the order they happened. When she finished, Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Noah was hovering in the doorway to the hall, pretending to be interested in a knot in the floorboard. "Noah," Ethan said, "go wash up." "Pa? Go on." Noah went. Ethan put both hands flat on the table and looked at them, and Mara could see him working through it, the anger first, which he pushed down, and then the calculation, which he let come forward. "He threatened you," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. "He made an observation," Mara said with enough edge that Ethan looked up at her sharply. "His word, not mine." "Same thing." "Yes," she said, "same thing." Ethan pushed back from the table and stood. "I need to go into town." "Why?" "Because I need to talk to Sheriff Coulter before Prescott does," he said. "If he's planning to make legal trouble, I want Coulter to hear my side of it first." "He may already have Coulter," Mara said. She thought about what Alma had told her about judges and town councils and the particular kind of danger that wore a clean jacket. "Alma thinks Prescott has influence over most of the local officials. Coulter's a fair man," Ethan said. "We've had our differences, but he's fair." He picked up his hat. "You'll be all right here." "I've been all right here without you for most of the day," she said, and then felt immediately that it came out sharper than she meant it. She softened her voice. "I'll be fine. Just be careful what you say until we know who's listening." Ethan looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, just that same subtle rearrangement she'd been noticing since the beginning, like walls moving an inch at a time. "You think about things carefully," he said, "before you say them." "I've had to," she said. He nodded. Then he went. The sheriff's office was at the center of town, sandwiched between the telegraph station and the feed store, and Wade Coulter was at his desk when Ethan walked in without knocking. Coulter was a lean man in his 50s, with a face that had been lived in hard, and eyes that didn't miss much. He looked up when Ethan entered, and set down his coffee cup. "Figured I'd be seeing you today," Coulter said. "Then you already know," Ethan said. "Prescott came in this morning," Coulter said. "Filed a complaint against you. Says you're harboring his intended against her will." The words hit Ethan like something physical. Against her will. He said it flat, like he needed to hear it out loud to believe it. "She walked to my property on her own 2 feet and asked me for work." "I know that," Coulter said. "I'm telling you what he filed." "And what are you going to do about it?" Coulter leaned back in his chair and looked at Ethan with the steady, deliberate gaze of a man choosing his next words with care. "Nothing," he said. "Today. The complaint requires a hearing. Circuit judge comes through in 3 weeks. Until then, there's nothing legally actionable." He paused. "But Ethan, Prescott's also filed a claim that the woman brought personal property belonging to him, something about the contract she signed. She had a suitcase," Ethan said. "1 suitcase. She arrived with nothing." "Then it shouldn't be hard to prove," Coulter said. "But you need to understand he's going to make this ugly before the hearing. That's how he operates. He'll come at you sideways. Your reputation, your ranch, your—" He stopped, glanced at the door, then back. "Your boy." Ethan went very still. "What about my boy?" "He's been asking around about whether you're a fit guardian," Coulter said, and his voice had gone quiet and careful, the way voices go when they're carrying something heavy. "Prescott. He's suggesting that a widower taking in an unmarried woman of questionable character creates an unsuitable environment for a child." The silence in that office was absolute. Ethan's hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, slowly closed into fists. "He is going to use my son," he said, each word separate and very controlled, "to get to a woman he abandoned at a train station." "That's what I think," Coulter said. "Yes. Can he do that legally? With the right judge and the right story?" Coulter said, "He can do a great deal." He looked at Ethan steadily. "This is why I'm telling you now. You need to be ready." Ethan walked back to the ranch in a cold fury that had nothing to do with the summer heat. He was halfway up the path when Noah came running out to meet him. Boots still too big, shirt still half untucked, and grabbed his hand and started talking immediately about something Mara had shown him in the garden. And Ethan looked down at his son's face and felt the fury sharpen into something cleaner and harder and more dangerous than anger. He was not going to let Garrett Prescott touch this boy. Not with legal papers, not with implications, not with anything. He would burn the ranch to the ground first. That night, after Noah was asleep, Ethan told Mara what Coulter had said. All of it. He didn't soften it or spare her the worst of it because she had asked him once to be plain, and he intended to honor that. When he finished, Mara sat with it for a moment. Her hands were folded on the table. Her face was steady, that particular steadiness he'd been watching since the beginning, the kind you don't learn in easy times. "He's going to use Noah to pressure you," she said. "And he's going to use you to pressure me." "Yes." "He thinks if he threatens what you love," she said slowly, "you'll make me leave." Ethan met her eyes. "He doesn't know me very well." "No," Mara said. "But he doesn't need to. He's not betting on you being weak. He's betting on you being a father who doesn't want his son caught in the middle of someone else's trouble." She paused. "And that's a reasonable bet, Ethan. It's what any good father would do." The sound of his first name in her mouth was so unexpected that it landed strangely not unwelcome, just unfamiliar, like a room you've walked past 100 times, finally being opened. "Are you telling me I should make you leave?" he asked. "No," she said. "I'm telling you that I understand if you do, and I'm telling you that if you do, I won't fight you on it. I'll go." She looked at him directly. "But I want you to know that if I go, he wins. And the next woman he sends for the next woman who steps off that train, she'll be right where I was." The kitchen was quiet. The lamp between them threw a warm circle of light over the table over her hands, and his over the letters she'd written and not yet sent. 3 weeks, Ethan said finally. 3 weeks, she confirmed. "Then we hold the line until the circuit judge comes." "Yes." He nodded, and for the first time since all of this began, Mara felt the ground under her stop shifting. But the next morning, Prescott moved faster than either of them had anticipated. He didn't come to the ranch himself this time. He sent 2 men different from the riders who had come before, harder looking, wearing the expressionless efficiency of men, hired for specific purposes, with a letter bearing an official-looking seal that one of them pressed into Ethan's hands at the gate, while the other one watched the house. Ethan read it. His face didn't change. He folded it and said, "Tell your employer I'll respond through proper legal channels." The men left. Ethan came inside. He laid the letter on the table. Mara read it. It was short and precise and written in the kind of legal language designed to sound inevitable. A formal demand that she vacate the Hawkins property within 48 hours and present herself to Prescott's attorney in town to settle the matter of the contract, or face legal proceedings that would, the letter implied, involve not only her, but the household in which she was residing. 48 hours, she said. Yes. She set the letter down, looked at it for a moment, then picked it up again. "This is designed to frighten me into moving before the hearing," she said. If I show up at his attorney's office, I'm acknowledging the contract's legitimacy. If I don't, he uses the non-response to paint me as defiant and uncooperative in front of the judge. Ethan was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it. You've dealt with legal pressure before. No, she said. But I've dealt with men who use power the way other men use their fists. The method changes. The intention doesn't. She set the letter on the table and smoothed it flat with her palm. We need a lawyer. The only attorney in Elk Crossing works for Prescott, Ethan said. Then we need to write to someone outside Elk Crossing, she said. She was already moving toward the paper she'd been using for the letters. And we need to do it today. Noah appeared in the doorway, still in his nightclothes, hair matted from sleep, looking between the two of them, with the alert, anxious eyes of a child who has learned to read adult tension like weather. Is something wrong? He asked. Ethan looked at his son, then at Mara, then back at Noah. No, Ethan said. We're just solving a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that requires writing a lot of letters, Mara said. She held out her hand. Come have breakfast, and then you can help me address the envelopes. Your handwriting's better than your father's. Noah looked at Ethan, who confirmed this with a nod that carried just the ghost of a real smile. The boy came to the table, and while Noah ate and Mara wrote, and Ethan sat with his coffee and the terrible quiet weight of a man who has decided to stand his ground, regardless of the cost, Garrett Prescott was in town, in his attorney's office, signing a second document. One nobody at the Hawkins Ranch knew about yet. One that had nothing to do with Mara Collins at all. It had to do with the land. The land document arrived at the county recorder's office on a Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon, half of Elk Crossing knew about it. Ethan found out from Bill Marsh, who found out from the recorder's clerk, who had apparently told 3 people before noon. Bill came out to the ranch on horseback, hat in hand, looking like a man delivering news he wished he didn't have to carry. He's filed a prior claim, Bill said. On your north pasture, 40 acres. Ethan stood very still. On what basis? Says he has a deed predating yours, from the original land grant. Bill turned his hat in his hands. I don't know if it's real, Ethan. I'm just telling you what's been filed. It's not real, Ethan said. My father broke that land in 1861. We have the original deed. I have every document. Then you'll need them, Bill said. All of them. Because Prescott's attorney has already filed for a hearing before the circuit judge, same session as the other matter. He paused. He's combining them, Ethan. The claim on the woman and the claim on your land. Same hearing, same judge. The silence that followed was the kind that had a sound to it, the sound of a man understanding precisely what is being done to him and precisely why. He's burying her case in mine, Ethan said. Or burying yours in hers, Bill said quietly. Either way, you're both standing in front of the same judge at the same time, and Prescott controls the framing. After Bill left, Ethan stood at the fence line of his north pasture for a long time. He could feel the land under his boots, the way you feel something you grew up knowing, not just property, but continuity. His father's hands had built the fence he was leaning on. His son had taken his first steps in the grass 20 feet from where he stood. His wife was buried on a rise at the eastern edge of the property, where she had asked to be because she said she wanted to be able to see the house. Prescott was not going to take this land. That was not a decision Ethan made. It was something simpler than a decision. It was a fact he had always known, the way you know your own name. He walked back to the house and told Mara. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, He's not after the land. Ethan frowned. He filed a claim. He filed the claim to pressure you, she said. Think about what he wants. He wants me to go to his attorney's office and sign something that validates that contract. Everything else is leverage. She looked at him steadily. The land claim disappears the moment I sign. You don't know that. I know men like him, she said. The land is a hostage. I'm the ransom. Ethan pulled a chair out from the table and sat down heavily. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands for a moment, just long enough to let the weight of it press down before he pushed it back up. Then he straightened. "I'm not asking you to sign anything," he said. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever happens with my land, that's not your burden to carry." "It became my burden the moment he filed it as part of the same case," Mara said. "You know that." He looked at her. She looked back at him. Neither of them said the thing that was sitting in the middle of the table between them, the thing about how neither of them had chosen any of this, and both of them were in it anyway, and what that meant was something neither of them was ready to name yet. "What do you need?" he asked. "Those letters I wrote," she said. "They need to go out today, and I need Alma." Alma Beckett came that same afternoon, and she brought something Mara hadn't expected. She brought a woman named Ruth Calloway. Ruth was in her early 40s, thin in the way that spoke of hard years, with hands that didn't stop moving, fingers working the hem of her coat, pressing flat against her thighs, lacing and unlacing. She sat at the Hawkins kitchen table, like someone sitting in a room she hadn't been sure she'd survive entering. "Ruth came to Elk Crossing 2 years ago," Alma said. "On the train, for Garrett Prescott." Mara looked at the woman. Ruth looked at the table. "He left before I arrived too," Ruth said. Her voice was quiet but steady, the steadiness of something that had been shaking for a long time and had finally gone past the point of shaking. "He came back 3 days later, full of apologies, same as he gave you. I was so relieved I almost didn't notice what I was signing." "What did you sign?" Mara asked. "He told me it was the marriage license," Ruth said. I was embarrassed and grateful, and so desperate to believe it was going to be all right." She stopped. "It wasn't the marriage license. I found out later it was a document transferring the rights to a parcel of land my father had left me in Kansas. Small plot, not worth much, but it was mine." She looked up at Mara for the first time. "He's done it to others. Alma knows of at least 2 more. Would you testify to that?" Mara asked. "In front of the circuit judge?" Ruth's hands went still in her lap. "I've been afraid of him for 2 years, she said. "Every time I see him in town, I cross to the other side of the road." She was quiet for a moment. "But I am so tired of crossing the road." "Then don't," Mara said. Ruth looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded once the way you nod when you've decided something that can't be undecided. "All right," she said. "I'll testify." After Ruth left with Alma, Noah appeared from the hallway, where he had clearly been sitting listening for the better part of an hour. He looked at Mara with an expression that was somewhere between admiration and something more complicated. "You're fighting him," Noah said. "Yes," Mara said. "What if he wins?" She crouched down to his level. "Then we figure out what comes next," she said. "But we don't decide he wins before the fight's over. That's not how it works." Noah chewed on this with the gravity of a child processing something larger than his years. "Pa fights like that," he said finally. "He doesn't quit." "I know he doesn't," Mara said. "Is that why you like him?" The question landed with the guileless precision that only 7-year-olds could manage. Mara felt heat move into her face and said with great composure, "Go find something useful to do, Noah." He grinned a real full grin, the first one she'd seen on him that didn't have anything sad underneath it, and went. She stood up and realized Ethan was in the doorway behind her. She had no idea how long he'd been there. His expression told her it was long enough. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. He moved past her to the counter and poured himself coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and the back of his neck was doing something interesting, and Mara turned back to her letters, and neither of them addressed it at all. 2 days before the hearing, Prescott escalated. His attorney sent a second letter, this one considerably less measured than the first. It accused Mara of conspiracy to defraud, of falsifying her circumstances to gain access to the Hawkins household, and implied that her relationship with Ethan was of a morally compromised nature designed to manipulate a grieving widower. It stated that Prescott intended to present evidence of this character at the hearing, and suggested that the court might find Ethan Hawkins's fitness as a guardian worth examining in light of the company he kept. Mara read the letter twice. Then she set it down and said, "He's frightened." Ethan stared at her. "He just called you a con artist and threatened to take my son." "I know," she said. "And he wouldn't be doing any of that if he thought he could win on the actual evidence." She tapped the letter. "This is what a man does when the ground is shifting under him and he knows it. He starts throwing anything he can reach." Ethan was pacing, which she had never seen him do. He was a still man by nature, economical, with his movement deliberate. The pacing meant he was working very hard to keep the fury contained and not entirely succeeding. "Ethan." Her voice was quiet but direct. He stopped. "I need you to be calm in that courtroom. Whatever he says about me, about us, I need you to be the steadiest man in the room. Because the judge is going to be watching how you respond." "I know that," he said tightly. "Then stop pacing." He stopped. He looked at her. Something that might have been a different kind of anger moved through his expression, but he breathed through it, and his shoulders came down, and he was still again. "You're very good at this," he said. "At what? At knowing what people need to hear and when to say it." She thought about all the years of reading faces, all the years of managing other people's emotions, because no one was managing hers. "I've had a lot of practice," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and there was something in his expression she was learning to recognize the look of a man who was understanding something about her, incrementally, piece by piece, the way you understand a country, by traveling through it, rather than looking at a map. "After this is over," he said. "Not a question, not a declaration, just the beginning of something." "After it's over," she agreed. The morning of the hearing Elk Crossing turned out in a way that small towns always turn out for spectacle. The courthouse was standing room by 9 o'clock. Mara walked in with Ethan on her left and Alma Beckett on her right, and she felt the weight of every set of eyes in that room settle on her as she came through the door, and she kept her chin level and her pace steady, and she did not look at Garrett Prescott, who was already at the front of the room with his attorney, and a face arranged into an expression of benevolent patience that made her want to throw something. Judge Ellery was a small man with large glasses and the air of someone who had heard every possible human story and remained interested in all of them. He called the room to order with a single knock of his gavel and then looked at the docket in front of him and said, "We have combined two matters this morning at the request of the petitioner. I'll hear them together." He looked up. "But I want to be clear, I will evaluate them separately. Combined filing does not mean combined judgment." Prescott's attorney, a tall man named Aldridge, who had the voice of someone who charged by the word, opened first. He was smooth and prepared, and he laid out Prescott's position with the practiced confidence of a man who had won a great many hearings in front of a great many judges. He presented the contract. He presented the land deed. He presented affidavits from 3 townspeople attesting to the irregular nature of Mara's presence at the Hawkins Ranch. Then he said, "Your Honor, the petitioner contends that Miss Collins entered this community under false pretenses, failed to fulfill her obligations under a lawful contract, and has since engaged in conduct unbecoming of a woman of good character, conduct that reflects poorly on all parties involved, including the minor child residing in the Hawkins household." From 2 rows back, Mara heard Noah make a small, sharp sound that Ethan immediately silenced with a hand on the boy's shoulder. She felt Ethan's jaw tighten beside her without looking at him. Judge Ellery peered over his glasses at Aldridge. "Counsel, the minor child is not a party to either of these matters. His welfare is a relevant consideration, Your Honor, given." "I'll decide what's relevant in my courtroom," Ellery said mildly, but with an edge underneath it that Aldridge heard because he stopped talking. "Continue with the evidence." Mara's attorney, a man named Foster, she had reached by telegraph, who had ridden 2 days to be here and charged less than she'd feared rose next. He was not as polished as Aldridge. He was methodical and unhurried, and he presented 3 things: the original deed to the Hawkins land registered 26 years prior in Ethan's father's name, with a clear and unbroken chain of title; the testimony of the station master, who confirmed that Prescott had not been present at Elk Crossing Station on the day Mara arrived; and the letters Mara had received from the two women in Kansas and Nebraska who could not travel to testify in person, but had committed their accounts to writing under oath. Then Ruth Calloway stood up. She was still thin. Her hands were still moving. But her voice when she spoke was level and clear, and it carried to every corner of that room. My name is Ruth Calloway. 2 years ago, Garrett Prescott sent for me the same way he sent for Mara Collins. He left before I arrived. He came back with apologies and a document he told me was a marriage license. She paused. It was not a marriage license. It transferred land my father left me to a holding company that traces back to Garrett Prescott. She looked directly at the judge. I am not the first woman he has done this to. I am simply the first one who stayed close enough to say so. The room erupted. Ellery's gavel came down twice, and it went quiet again, but the quality of the quiet was different. Charged, attentive, the quiet of a room that has just had its understanding of a situation fundamentally rearranged. Prescott was on his feet. Your Honor, this woman has no standing. Sit down, Mr. Prescott, Ellery said. He said it very quietly, which was somehow more authoritative than if he'd shouted it. Prescott sat. Alma Beckett was called. She spoke for 7 minutes, which was longer than she'd intended, because once she started talking about what she'd witnessed in Elk Crossing over the years, the women who arrived with hope and left with less than they'd come with, the way Prescott moved through the town, with the unchallenged ease of a man no one had yet found reason enough to challenge. She found she had more to say than she'd planned. Then the judge turned to Mara. Miss Collins, he said, you've heard a great deal said about you this morning. Is there anything you'd like to add? Mara stood. She did not look at Prescott. She looked at the judge, and she spoke the way she'd decided she would speak, plainly, without performance, without the anger she absolutely had the right to, and had chosen strategically and on principle both to set aside. Your Honor, she said, I traveled to Elk Crossing in good faith to meet a man who had given me his word. He was not there. I found work and shelter with an honest family, and I intended to remain employed there until I had the means to determine my next steps. In the meantime, I was threatened, pressured, and legally maneuvered by a man who apparently has a practiced system for doing exactly these things to women who have nothing and nobody. She paused. I am asking this court to recognize that the contract in question was abandoned by the petitioner before I arrived, that I owe him nothing, and that the land claim against Mr. Hawkins is a fabrication designed to coerce my compliance. She folded her hands. That is all I have to add. The room was very quiet. Ellery looked at her for a long moment over the top of his glasses. Then he made a note. Then he looked at Prescott, who was sitting very still, with an expression that had gone from patient to controlled to something that was neither. I'll take a brief recess, Ellery said. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. The 30 minutes lasted an hour. Mara sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with Ethan beside her and Noah on her other side, pressed against her arm, with the whole warm weight of him not saying anything just there. Alma sat across from them and drank coffee from a tin she'd brought in her coat pocket and offered it around without comment. Ethan's hand at some point during that hour found Mara's on the bench between them. He didn't make a thing of it. He just put his hand over hers and left it there, and she turned her hand over so that their palms were together, and that was all. Neither of them spoke about it. When Ellery called them back in, he wasted no time. In the matter of the contract, he said, looking at his notes, I find that the petitioner abandoned the terms of the agreement prior to fulfillment. The contract is void. Miss Collins has no legal obligation to the petitioner, and no legal claim may be made against her person or her current employment. He turned the page. In the matter of the land claim. He looked up at Prescott over his glasses, and the look was not warm. The deed presented by the petitioner has a date discrepancy that the court finds irregular. I am referring this to the county recorder for full investigation. The existing deed in Mr. Hawkins' name stands. Another pause. I am also, on the basis of testimony heard today, requesting that the county attorney review the petitioner's conduct with regard to the other women named in this proceeding. The gavel came down once. We're adjourned. Garrett Prescott walked out of that courthouse without looking at anyone, and Mara watched him go with a steady gaze and a heart that was beating very fast, and hands that were for the first time in as long as she could remember, completely still. Beside her, Noah let out a breath so large it seemed to come from somewhere below his boots. "We won," he said. "Yes," Mara said. "Pa," Noah said. "We won." Ethan looked down at his son. Then he looked at Mara. His eyes held everything he hadn't said yet. Everything that was waiting quiet and patient for the right moment. "Yeah," he said softly. "We did." They walked out of that courthouse into the full weight of a Wyoming summer afternoon, and for a moment, none of them said anything at all. Noah was still pressed against Mara's side, one hand gripping the fabric of her sleeve, without seeming to realize he was doing it. Ethan walked slightly ahead, hat back on head, down the way a man walks when he's processing something too large to carry all at once. Alma Beckett stopped on the courthouse steps and looked at Mara with those sharp, measuring eyes. And then she did something Mara had not seen her do in all the days she'd known her. She smiled. Not the beginning of one. A real one, full and warm and entirely unguarded. "Well," Alma said, "I'll be." "Thank you," Mara said. "For Ruth. For all of it." "Don't thank me," Alma said, same as she'd said the first day. Then softer. "But you're welcome." She pulled her coat straight, looked out at the street, and added without looking back, "Come see me when things settle. I have a proposition for you that has nothing to do with any of this business." She walked off down the street before Mara could ask what she meant, and Mara filed it away for later because there was enough to hold right now without adding more. Ruth Calloway was waiting near the bottom of the steps. She looked different than she had inside the courtroom. Not lighter exactly, but less compressed, as though something she'd been bracing against for 2 years had finally been removed, and her body hadn't caught up to the fact that she could breathe fully yet. "Thank you," Mara said to her. "What you did in there." "I did it for me too," Ruth said quietly. "Don't make me noble. I'm just tired." She looked at Mara steadily. "You going to be all right?" "Yes," Mara said. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the word felt completely true. Ruth nodded once and walked away. And Mara watched her go, and thought about all the women who came before and after all the ones on the platform, and off it all the ones who deserved someone to sit across from them at a table and say plainly, "He was wrong, and you owe him nothing." Noah tugged her sleeve. "Can we go home now?" Home. The word landed in her chest with a precision that took her breath for half a second. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Noah fell asleep against Mara's arm in the wagon before they'd cleared the edge of town, which was the particular trust of a child who has finally felt safe enough to let his guard down in the presence of another person. Ethan drove. The road stretched out in the afternoon heat, familiar and ordinary. And nothing like the road she'd walked up 2 weeks ago carrying a suitcase that felt like the entire weight of her life. Ethan said without preamble, "He's not going to leave it alone." Mara looked at him. "I know." Ellery referred the case to the county attorney. "That doesn't mean anything happens quickly. Prescott has money, and he has lawyers, and he's going to find another angle." "He'll try," she said. "You're not worried." "I'm worried," she said. "I'm just done letting the worry make decisions for me." Ethan glanced at her sideways, then back at the road. "Alma said she had a proposition for you. She mentioned something." "She's been trying to hire somebody for the store for 2 years, he said. "Can't find anyone she trusts enough." A pause. "She trusts you." Mara was quiet for a moment. The wagon wheels turned. Noah made a small sound in his sleep and pressed closer. "That would mean staying in Elk Crossing," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "It would." He didn't look at her when he said it. He kept his eyes on the road with the deliberate focus of a man who is pretending he has not just said something significant. Mara looked at the side of his face, the jaw she'd watched tighten in courtrooms and relax over breakfast, the eyes she'd seen go soft when his son laughed and go hard when something threatened what he loved. And she felt something settle in her with the finality of a key turning in a lock. "I was thinking of staying anyway," she said. He didn't smile, not all the way, but the corners of his eyes did something, and his hands on the reins loosened by about a degree. And for Ethan Hawkins, that was the equivalent of throwing his hat in the air. "All right then," he said. "All right," she agreed. They drove the rest of the way in the comfortable quiet of people who have said enough. The first 2 weeks after the hearing were not quiet. Prescott's attorney filed a motion to revisit the contract decision before the same circuit judge, which Ellery dismissed in 4 sentences. There was an editorial in the county paper clearly fed information by someone in Prescott's orbit that referred obliquely to the Hawkins household and the irregular arrangements therein, using the kind of language designed to imply scandal without stating it outright. 2 of Ethan's neighbors who had been friendly grew cooler, which Ethan absorbed without comment, though Mara noticed he came in from the north pasture one afternoon with his jaw set so tight it could have cut glass. "Which one?" she asked, handing him coffee without being asked. "Patterson," he said. "Said he'd heard things. Said he wasn't sure he could send his hired men to help with my harvest this year like he'd planned." "What did you say?" "I said that was his right. And then I said that if he repeated the things he'd heard in public, I'd have something to say about the quality of his water rights application, which I happen to know is currently under review." He drank the coffee. He reconsidered. Mara looked at him. "Ethan Hawkins," she said. "Was that a threat?" "It was an observation," he said with precisely the same inflection she had used weeks ago in her doorway to Prescott, and the recognition of it landed between them and became a smile on both their faces. Simultaneously, his slow and startled hers quicker, and it was the first time they had laughed together. About anything really laughed, and it lasted about 4 seconds, but it felt like something opening. The editorial in the paper turned out to be the mistake that finished Prescott more effectively than anything the court had done. Ruth Calloway wrote a response. She submitted it to the paper herself, walked in the front door of the printing office on a Tuesday morning, and set it on the editor's desk, and said, "You printed his version, print mine." The editor, a man named Goss, who prided himself on having no enemies, and consequently no opinions, either read it and turned it over in his hands and looked at the woman in front of him, who was standing with the particular posture of someone who has decided they are done being small, and he printed it. Ruth's letter named names. It named dates. It laid out precisely what had happened to her in plain language, without drama and without apology. And it ended with a single line that traveled through Elk Crossing like water finding its level. "I am not the first." Ask any woman who came here on the train looking for a man named Garrett Prescott. 3 more women came forward within the week. Not all of them were from Elk Crossing. One had sent a letter from as far as Colorado. But they came in various forms: letters, telegrams, 2 in person, and what they brought with them was the particular devastating power of pattern made visible. Not one woman's word against one man's. Not an accusation. A record. The county attorney, whose name was Sims, and who had been carefully non-committal up to that point, opened a formal investigation. Prescott left town on a Thursday morning without telling anyone he was going. His ranch hand came into Beckett's store on Friday, asking if Alma knew when Mr. Prescott planned to return, and Alma said she did not. And the look she and Mara exchanged over the counter was the look of 2 women who have watched a specific kind of man make a specific kind of exit before and know exactly what it means. "He ran," Noah said at dinner that night with the uncomplicated satisfaction of a child who has not yet learned to be diplomatic about things that deserve no diplomacy. "He left town," Ethan said. "Same thing," Noah said. Ethan looked at Mara. Mara looked at her plate with great composure. "Same thing," Ethan agreed quietly. It was 3 days after Prescott's departure that Ethan found Mara in the garden at dusk, pulling the last of the weeds from the section Noah had been trying to tend all summer. The boy had gone to bed early, worn through from a day that had involved a great deal of running and very little useful work, which was appropriate for a 7-year-old in summer. The ranch was quiet. The air had finally let go of some of the heat, and what was left was the particular soft warmth of a summer evening, settling toward night. Ethan sat on the porch steps and watched her work for a moment without speaking. She could feel his gaze the way you feel weather changing, not intrusive, just present. "I want to say something," he said finally. She kept her hands in the dirt. "All right." "When you first came here," he said, "I told myself it was practical. Room and board for work. A solution to a problem." He paused. "I told myself that for about 4 days." Mara sat back on her heels and looked at him. "Noah needed you," he said. "That was real, and it was part of it, and I won't pretend it wasn't. But that wasn't all of it." He looked at his hands, then back at her. "You stayed. When any sensible person would have left when leaving would have been the safer and smarter choice. You stayed. Not for me. Not even for Noah. You stayed because leaving felt like letting something win that didn't deserve to." She was very still. "I recognize that," he said quietly. "Because it's the only way I know how to be too." The dusk was fully settled around them. Somewhere across the pasture, cattle moved and settled. The house behind them held the particular warmth of a house with a child sleeping in it. "I'm not asking you to be anything you're not," Ethan said. "I'm not asking you to take on my grief or my boy or my complications as a condition of anything. But I am—" He stopped, started again more careful. "I would like to know if you intend to stay because you want to. Not because you have nowhere else to go. Because you want to." Mara looked at him for a long moment. This man who had crouched in a field and said "this isn't mama" with a voice like gravel because his son needed the truth even when the truth was brutal. This man who had stood at a fence line and made a silent decision she'd recognized without him saying a word. This man who had put his hand over hers on a courthouse bench and not said a single thing about it. "I stayed through the legal threats," she said. "I stayed through the newspaper. I stayed through 2 men on horseback and a letter with a legal seal, and a 48-hour ultimatum." She held his gaze. "What exactly are you worried I'm going to leave over?" He looked at her. Something in his expression broke open, not dramatically, not in pieces, but the way a knot releases when the right tension is finally applied from the right direction. Slow and clean and complete. "Nothing," he said, "when you put it that way." "Good," she said, "because I'm not leaving." He nodded. He reached down and offered her his hand, and she took it, and he pulled her to her feet, and they stood there in the last of the evening light, close enough that she could see the tiredness in his face, and the relief underneath it, and below that quiet and real, the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet, but recognized. "Mara," he said. Just her name. Nothing after it. "I know," she said. And she did. The twist nobody saw coming arrived 2 mornings later in the form of a letter from the county recorder's office. Mara was at the kitchen table when Ethan came in with it, and she knew from the way he held it, careful like it might bite, that it wasn't ordinary. He set it on the table, and she opened it and read it, and then she read it again. "What is it?" Noah asked from across the table where he was supposed to be practicing his letters. Ethan looked at Mara. Mara looked at Ethan. "The land Prescott filed the false claim on," she said slowly. "The North Pasture." "Yes," Ethan said. "Read the second paragraph." She had already read it. She read it again to be certain. "The investigation into the deed discrepancy uncovered a secondary filing," she said carefully. "One that Prescott had made 3 years ago before the land claim, before any of this. He had filed paperwork attempting to reclassify the water rights on the North Pasture water rights that feed from the same source as 4 other ranches in the county." She looked up. "He was never after you specifically. He was after the water." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them the way he had the night she'd told him about Prescott's visit. "He needed a reason to contest the title," he said slowly. "The contract with you gave him a foothold. If he could establish any connection between his claim on you and my property, he could challenge the title on grounds adjacent to it," Mara said. "Use the legal confusion to create enough dispute around the deed that he could move on the water rights in the interim." She set the letter down. "He was never coming back for me. I was a tool, a legal instrument." Noah was looking between them with the focused intensity of someone following a conversation in a language he mostly, but not quite entirely, spoke. "He used you to steal Pa's water," he said. "He tried to," Mara said. "But he failed," Noah said. "Completely," Mara said. Noah considered this for a moment. Then he picked up his pencil and went back to his letters with the air of a person who has received a satisfactory conclusion and is ready to move on. Mara almost laughed. Ethan did laugh quiet, real the laugh of a man who has been holding his breath for 3 weeks. The county attorney's investigation expanded. Within a month, it reached beyond Elk Crossing into 3 neighboring counties. Within 2 months, Garrett Prescott was formally indicted on charges that included deed fraud, contract deception, and misrepresentation of legal documents to multiple parties. He was found in a town in Colorado, which surprised no one who had watched him ride out of Elk Crossing without looking back. Mara was not required to testify at the criminal proceeding. Her civil case was already resolved. But she wrote a statement that the county attorney used, and she wrote it in the same plain language she'd used in Ellery's courtroom. No performance, no embellishment, just the truth in the order it happened. Ruth Calloway's land in Kansas was restored to her through a separate civil judgment. She came to tell Mara in person, drove out to the ranch on a morning when the summer was finally beginning to think about letting go of its heat, and the cottonwoods along the fence line had gone their first pale hints of gold. "It's not much land," Ruth said, "but it was my father's." "That makes it everything," Mara said. Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at the house behind her, at the garden that was no longer wild with weeds, at Noah running along the fence line, pretending to be some variety of fast animal, at Ethan coming in from the barn and raising a hand in greeting from across the yard. "You look like you belong here," Ruth said. Mara considered the statement, not the idea of it, but the specific weight of it, the way it sat in her body when she let it land. She thought about a train platform in the summer heat, and $4.60, and a worn suitcase, and the particular hollow sound of a train pulling away. She thought about a boy running across a field, arms out certain. "I do," she said. That evening, Mara sat on the porch in the last of the daylight and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into itself. Noah inside arguing amicably with his father about whether 7-year-olds required as much sleep as some people seemed to think the distant cattle. The dog, the boards beneath her feet, that had been old when Ethan's father stood on them. Ethan came out when Noah had finally been successfully deposited in his bed. He sat beside her without ceremony, close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching, and they looked out at the darkening yard together. "He asked me something today," Ethan said. "Noah. He asked if you were going to be his mother." The evening was very quiet. Mara let the words settle into the air between them without rushing them. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "I told him that was a conversation for grown people to have," Ethan said, "and that he should mind his own business." "That's fair." "He said that you were his business." Mara was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's not wrong." Ethan turned to look at her. She turned to look at him. The evening was fully dark now, just the warm light from the kitchen window laying a rectangle of gold across the porch boards between them. "I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean," Ethan said. "I know that. And I'm not a man who moves fast when the ground has only just stopped shaking. I know that too. But I am a man," he said, "who knows the difference between someone passing through and someone who was always supposed to be here." He held her gaze. "And I've known which one you were since that first morning when you told my son that biscuits don't wait for anybody and sat him down at the table." Mara felt something in her chest, release something she hadn't entirely known was still held, and she breathed out slowly and looked at this man, and thought about all the ways the world had tried to tell her she was too much and not enough simultaneously, and how every one of those verdicts had been wrong, and how she had survived every single one of them to arrive at this porch at this evening, at this man looking at her like she was not a consolation but a destination. "Ask me," she said quietly. He reached over and took her hand the same way he had on the courthouse bench. No ceremony. Just presence. Just the deliberate placement of his hand over hers. "Stay," he said. "Not for Noah. Not because you have nowhere else. Stay, because you want this, me, this ranch, this life, and because you'll tell me plainly if that changes." "It won't change," she said. "I know," he said. "But I wanted to hear you say it. Ethan." She turned her hand under his palm to palm. "I traveled 1,000 miles for a man who didn't want me, and I ended up exactly where I was supposed to be. I'm not going anywhere." From inside the house, so soft she almost missed it, came a small sound. Noah's voice talking in his sleep, the way he sometimes did, some dream conversation with someone she couldn't hear. She had learned the rhythms of his nights. She knew the difference between the sounds that needed tending and the ones that were just the noise of a child's mind working through the day. This one was fine. This one was peaceful. She was still holding Ethan's hand when the night fully settled around the ranch and the stars came out over Wyoming, and the house behind them held its small breathing life, and neither of them felt the need to say another word. She was not the woman who had been left at the station. She was not the woman who had stood in the summer dust with $4.60 and the specific grief of someone who has been promised everything and given nothing. She was Mara Collins, and she was home, and she had chosen it, and it had chosen her, and every mile of the hard road that had brought her here had been worth exactly this. This porch, this hand, this quiet, this life that had found her when she'd had nothing left to lose, and had turned out to be everything she'd ever needed. She stayed, and she never looked back at that station again.